My name's Alex Salkever, and I work at dailyfinance.com, which is a new unit of AOL, part of the Tim Armstrong content onslaught. And the panel we have today this afternoon is going to discuss covering the economic collapse. We're going to look back at how it's been covered at different types of levels, and also we're going to look at how organizations are starting to cover it going forward. And so we have three panelists here, and I'm actually going to let them introduce themselves because I think they probably do a better job with that than I do. So Maribel, go ahead.
Hi everyone, I'm Maribel Perez-Wadsworth, Managing Editor for Digital Content at the News Press in Fort Myers, and as such I oversee our websites and all of our breaking news coverage, including that of the economy over the past year.
I'm Ellen Weiss, I'm the Senior Vice President of News at NPR.
I'm Rich Barbieri, I'm the Deputy Managing Editor of CNNMoney.com.
And so the format, like the other panels have been, it's going to be about 10 minutes per person, and then we're going to have time for some questions afterwards. Feel free to break in with questions pretty much at any time. We want this to be a very loose, interactive session, or any insights or anything at all. So I guess we're going to start with, we decided we're going to start with Ellen first? Okay.
What?
Want to start with Maribel? We can start with Maribel.
Either way.
Where this is going, I guess I am. Okay. Everyone with us on this Friday afternoon? Yes. All right. Now if I can just find the PowerPoint I just had here, we'll be ready to go. So what I want to talk to you all about is really the local perspective of covering this story. When the market went into free fall basically last year, newspapers in communities such as mine, we weren't trying to be CNN or NPR or any of the other national media covering the big national story and how we had gotten there or anything else. What we were trying to do was really connect the dots for our local audience and explain to them what they needed to know, offer them resources, etc. So basically it was about connecting the dots and offering the coping tools and so on and so forth. What was different probably this time than any other time that we were doing what we do is the level of acceleration, I guess, in terms of engaging with that audience, to have them basically put them in the driver's seat, if you will, to help us determine what information they needed, how they needed it, when they needed it, to really reach out across all kinds of platforms. And also to do something that we had maybe at times been averse to doing, which was to link out very consistently to sources, other sources, even competing sources rather, that maybe we had been more resistant in the past to do, but now we felt compelled to really connect people with information as quickly as possible, as efficiently as possible. So some of the things that we did in this effort is we really took everything down to a grassroots level, and among the things we did, we decided to host town halls and gathered on various topics, foreclosures, ways to really put our economy, our local economy back on track. We launched a series called Road to Recovery, which was basically 31 days of one topic a day drill downs into things that our readers were telling us they needed to know. For example, and we crowdsourced this, by the way, via Facebook and Twitter and on our website and in paper across every available way. And among the topics were things like, well, I finally hit my limit. How do I file for bankruptcy? I don't have insurance anymore. I've just lost my insurance. I lost my job. How does COBRA work? What types of things do I need to know about filing for unemployment? Things like that. So we went ahead and did that and learned a few things along the way. The live chats we hosted with an expert each weekday at noon. We found that that was a time that readers were connecting to us. We were seeing increases in traffic at that time. So they were taking their lunch breaks and basically lunching with us and getting some information at the same time. Those live chats on these various topics then spun off into how-to videos on the same topic so that people could replay them at their leisure and get the information when they needed it. The how-tos were a big success. You know, for us, and I think for a lot of people, video is still this, you know, we don't quite have it figured out thing on our websites. It takes a lot of effort, but doesn't necessarily give us back a lot. In this case, the how-to videos increased our streams for the month by 20%, which was a nice healthy boost and showed us that maybe we were onto something in terms of how to connect certain types of information to people. So the town hall meetings were, for us, a really great way to connect live and in person our audience to the sources of information they needed. And as you can see, they were at times pretty raw. And in our community, which had gone from a relatively benign 2% unemployment rate to a nearly 13% unemployment rate, and oftentimes we were leading the nation in foreclosures, there was a lot of anger and a lot of hurt. And at the other end of this gentleman's wagging finger is a mortgage lender, and this was at a foreclosure town hall that we hosted. Several hundred people attended these, and we live streamed them and also used Cover It Live for live chats to get more people connected at the same time. One of the things that, I went backwards. One of the things that we learned also is that as much as this effort is about engaging and connecting, it's also about community leadership, which I think sometimes we maybe lose sight of a little bit. And so this led to another idea that we had. We were toward the end of the school year, we were faced with 2/3 of the students in Lee County Public Schools are on free or reduced lunch. And during the school year, many of those students eat only at school during the week. And there were things like the backpack programs that have become pretty popular across the country. They would pack a backpack for the kids and they'd go home over the weekend with these backpacks and feed their families. But school was ending, and so were the backpack programs and the free and reduced lunch. So we realized that we were headed for a train wreck as a community, and our newspaper and website called the community to action, basically. We had a group of community leaders, business leaders, politicians, nonprofit groups come together and say, well, what needs to happen? And we knew basically what we needed was a lot of money, and we needed it pretty fast. So we did a huge push. We launched the Summer of Hunger Relief Fund, and pushing out through the social networks, particularly Facebook and Twitter, because our nonprofits, we found, were already using them quite effectively. And so what we pushed out, they pushed out farther. In the course of basically 30 days, our community raised $400,000 and 420,000 pounds of food. And because of that, 20,000 fewer people didn't go hungry this summer. So I don't think we can ever forget the incredible reach that we have in our communities. And while I know for certain that we couldn't have done this if we'd used any one platform, it was really getting the word out across so many different ways that made it happen. I also don't think that we could have done it without the credibility that our news organization has in our community, and I know a lot of you bring that to the table as well. I want to show you one more example of something that I thought was really cool that was done just last week, or published, went live last week at the Tennessean in Nashville. The Tennessean.com started a few months ago crowdsourcing across various social networks. They use primarily Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. They wanted to tell the story of 20-somethings in their community. They identified that that group was especially hard hit by this economy. And they wanted to tell their stories and also connect them with some resources. So they launched Life on Hold. And what they've done with this, and if I can get to it, I'll show you what it looks like. They're telling the story through very short video clips of these several 20-somethings who agreed to participate. And then they've also, I don't know if it's going anywhere. Maybe? Maybe not. Well, there's always a technical glitch. That's all right. So Tennessean.com/lifeonhold, and you can look it up for yourself. But it, basically, they have a series of video clips and then used Discuss which many of you have heard of or are using already, discuss.com as their commenting platform. And the other folks in the community can then easily upload their own stories. And it's a very nice diary, if you will, of the tales of this demographic and what they're doing to try and help themselves through it, and then also connecting them through resources across the country that can help them and provide some assistance, and if nothing else, also help to commiserate in some cases. So I wish I could pull that up for you, but I can't, so I won't.
Well, do go check it out at Tennessean, and that's from someone who looks at a lot of local publications. That's some really interesting ways to cover that story locally. I'm sure people have a lot of questions for Maribel. I wanted to get to Ellen next, who obviously NPR has set some very interesting standards and done some neat things in this coverage. I was telling Ellen before that I showed my wife, who is a guitar teacher, or had her listen to The Giant Pool of Money, which I think Ellen's going to talk about, and she said, "Oh, now I understand this perfectly," which about the mortgage meltdown. So I mean, it's been amazing stuff that they've done there.
Thank you. At the risk of repeating myself, for those of you who need a visual aid, in radio we say the best pictures are in your mind, so feel free to close your eyes during this presentation and imagine pictures to fit.
Or ask questions.
Exactly. So let me talk a little bit about what Planet Money is, which was what grew out of the Giant Pool of Money and why we did it. The Giant Pool of Money was really two reporters, one who worked for This American Life and one who worked for NPR, who wanted to get together and had an idea that they thought that they could explain the mortgage crisis. And it was a huge aha moment for both of our organizations, particularly for me at NPR, because we have a business desk, we do business coverage, but it was clear that we needed to up our game, we needed to do something different. And the Giant Pool of Money taught us two things. One, that economic knowledge is no longer optional, but also that we learned that economic stories done right, that they can be delightful, they can be fascinating, they can be enriching, they can captivate the listener, and they can also build economic literacy. And I was laughing when you said that, because I actually think there was sort of a collective, oh, now I get it, after the Giant Pool of Money. Because we hear that over and over again, and I'm one of those people who said it. So the Giant Pool of Money was last May, a year ago May, and over the course of the summer, I took this one reporter, Adam Davidson, and I said, all right, what if you were to put together a unit? What would it look like? What would it sound like? And I sort of isolated him and protected him and said, just come up with a plan, we'll work on it together. And Ira Glass and I agreed that we wanted to continue this collaboration because really these two reporters kind of made magic together. And so we came up with this project. We called it Planet Money. It had no budget. It really had no launch of any sort. I actually thought of it as sort of a kind of a skunk works that we would start in September of 2008, that no one would really be paying attention to it because there was an election going on, and really who would care, and if it failed, it failed. It turned out that it was pure coincidence that we launched Planet Money on September 7th, 2008, which was the day the U.S. government bailed out Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. It also turned out that the first podcast, which I believe was about ball bearings, we threw out, and Adam from his living room did an original podcast to begin to try to explain what was going on. Alex was actually on vacation, so this was complete serendipity. It was not under the radar screen because obviously from that moment on the global economy has been in an increasing state of turmoil, and Planet Money, which was going to sort of begin at a slow jog, just sprinted all the way. Now, there were a couple of things that I was trying to do with the innovation of Planet Money. One was try to give some room for explaining the economy in non-jargon, without a lot of experts telling us what they think, and to really kind of break it down. I like to describe it that we were trying to do it almost without emotion, almost as if a scientist were approaching economics. And in fact, one of the things that I did was I took one of our very, very best science reporters, someone who didn't have a business background, but who could explain a quark and a black hole better than anybody I knew, and I put him on the Planet Money team. And it was just the right combination again, because it was as if he was approaching it like a scientist in terms of trying to get to the essence of what was going on. The audience response really was simply phenomenal. There were so many listeners that were downloading the Planet Money podcast that we had to go from once a week to 5 times a week. The podcast hit #1 on iTunes within 2 weeks, and this was without any marketing, without any advertisement. Yes, they were mentioned on Morning Edition and All Things Considered, which is worth a lot of marketing. But the blog became NPR's single most visited blog. It attracted countless new readers to NPR, and it just continued that way all through the fall. Now, I should say that there is a tremendous amount of wonderful economics reporting that's going on. It's not as if we were looking for something that wasn't being covered out there. But again, I think much of it is written for a self-select audience of people who are already economically literate. And I think what NPR figured out was there were a lot of really, really smart people who read these stories and still didn't get it. And frankly, they were our listeners. There were people who read the newspaper every day, they considered themselves smart people, and they were scared because they didn't understand it. And I think that too often those news consumers actually turned away from economics coverage rather than gravitated to it. And so the audience response to Planet Money, I think, proves that there is an enormous unmet need out there for economics reporting that is smart, sophisticated, lively, and engaging. Again, I always say that it's not that the audience doesn't want to learn, it's our job to make those stories compelling. So really, in some ways, for all of the remarkable response, for all that we were able to do, I think this last year, was in many ways kind of our least ambitious phase, because as all of you know, covering a breaking story is kind of the easiest kind of coverage. You just need a lot of energy and a lot of coffee. The truth is that Planet Money ended up being probably less focused on the planet than we first imagined, and that was because really we were the economic story of the day. We wanted our coverage to be global because it's really impossible to understand the U.S. economy without really a rich sense of knowing what's going on in the rest of the world. So that's what we thought we were going to be doing, and now I think that's where we're going to try to take it in its next phase. In terms of Planet Money's presence beyond the podcast, what's on the radio, in terms of its web presence, it's really about the blog for us at this point, and it's about building a community through social media tools. This has really been the fastest and sort of easiest way for us to bring the audience in. And we've had some really wonderful success with this. In fact, when I went to talk to Alex and Adam about sort of where they use social media, one of the things that both of them told me was that the original idea for the giant pool of money actually came from a blog. It came from calculatedrisk.com. And Alex had been reading them, and had it not been for them, I don't think the giant pool of money ever would have seen the light of day. But there are a couple of other really good examples. There was another series of stories that kind of appeared in the form of podcasts, and then on the radio, and then in a 1 hour This American Life about banking, called The Bad Bank. And what was really great was they sort of practiced it on the blog and in the podcast, and they asked the audience for feedback. And they got one email, very, very detailed, line by line, literally, of feedback. And they used pretty much every part. And it turned out that the person who wrote it was both an ex-banker and now an actor. So it was a perfect combination because he had a sense of finance and a sense of performance, which is really what they needed. The other things that we've noticed, and this is particularly through Twitter and a little bit through Facebook really though, is that we're really able to spot trends. And one of the things that I remembered clearly, and it was affirmed, is really starting around January and February, when we were bringing the audience in, we started to notice that companies were no longer laying off people, they were furloughing them. And this was a trend that kept emerging from the audience. And in fact, when the statistics came out about the number of hours that the U.S. workforce was working, it had gone down to 33 hours a week because it wasn't that necessarily that the companies were laying off people, it's that they were reducing their hours. And so when we took that information, sort of put it against the economists, it was really great for us to be ahead of the trend. I'd say the other trend that we're seeing emerge right now, again, through the participation of the audience, is that when people are finding jobs, they're finding them with a salary that's about 25% less of the salaries that they left. And I suspect, I hope, that we'll see, sometime in the next 6 months, that our completely unscientific audience research will prove that out. So the next goal for Planet Money and things that we've been trying to experiment with is how we can do a little bit of what you're doing, which is kind of use the Planet Money convening authority to bring together sort of great minds and sort of a broad, curious public to, again, explore sort of the crucial issues now, which is, what is the role of government in a market economy? How should financial institutions be regulated to prevent further crises? So we've just done one experiment with the Pew Foundation. And again, what we did was we sort of took that, cut it up, shared it in terms of the podcast, on the blog, put it on the radio. But I think we see that, that there really is this interest and that there's a way to be, frankly, entertaining while you're educating the public about the economy.
We didn't plan this, but Ellen actually makes a very important point that I also wanted to get to, and that is as difficult and intense as the last 18 months have been for all of us who've covered this, as much as it's aged us in dog years, the next phase of the coverage is harder and probably even more important. I just wanted to sum up the sort of arc of the narrative of our coverage at CNN Money. I mean, it sort of started in early 2007 as a story about a subprime mortgage meltdown that all the smart economists said assured everyone would be contained in a sort of sector of the mortgage market. And then it quickly became a Wall Street problem where these banks that had found all these fancy ways over the years to hide risk and sort of avoid the risk they were taking had to acknowledge the fact that they were going to have to recognize those shitty assets as losses. And then in 2008, it became a story about the election, a political story. CNN made a commitment to go very hard on the primaries and the political coverage, and we sort of invented this Issue 1 moniker, and we went out in the states and covered primaries and covered the issues and the candidates. But it was still not, even though we called it Issue 1, I think it really wasn't Issue 1 in the campaign. And then the summer came, and the Fannie and Freddie takeover Labor Day weekend, and then the Lehman Brothers weekend when it became a sort of global banking panic. And so where are we now? I mean, we're in what's probably going to be a long recession. Again, if you listen to economists, we may even be out of it. Bernanke said 2 weeks ago that we're very likely out of it. To which I say, WTF? I mean, there's the 9.8% unemployment. A lot of homeowners are underwater on their mortgages, and with very little hope of seeing that reverse anytime soon. And that's sort of my point, I hope, which is that covering the economy is a story about covering people. It starts with numbers, but it's really about jobs and homes and income and money, and that's what. I mean, we sort of knew that going in, I hope, but that's definitely been the takeaway at CNN Money in the last 18 months. Two anecdotes. I mean, just today, we and everyone else probably reported that 1 million people filed for personal bankruptcy in the first 9 months of the year. This is 4 years after Congress passed a law to try to make it, and did make it a lot harder and more expensive for people to file for personal bankruptcy. So there's a story behind every one of those bankruptcies that we as journalists need to ferret out. The other thing that I'm just taken with is in the last couple weeks, in preparation for our coverage of the Lehman anniversary, I was looking back at all of the news alerts we did that day, and I found one at like 8:37 p.m. That I had completely forgotten about, that Hewlett-Packard announces it's going to lay off 26,000 people. And when people think of September 15th, they think obviously of Lehman and the bankruptcy and the kind of... What's that?
AIG.
AIG the next day was sort of the bloodletting on Wall Street and in New York. And here's a story about 26,000 people losing their jobs in a completely different sector of the economy that was supposed to be immune from the problems of Wall Street, and that was a real harbinger. And I think a reminder to all of us who cover this stuff, all of you who cover this stuff, that again, it's about people at the end of the day, not about just sort of banks and Wall Street. So where are we? I mean, 18 months later, we at CNN Money, I hope we've learned how to better demystify really complex stuff, the kind of subjects that Planet Money does so well, and the kind of financial products whose opacity was one of the causes of the collapse in the first place. So I think it's really important going forward that we all sort of take what we learned and apply it to what will inevitably be the next phase of this. I mean, the recession, whether it's technically over or not, will end. Unemployment will not be 9.8% forever. It'll be 5% again, and maybe even less than 5%. And the economy will create more jobs every month than it sheds. But then, economic cycles will start again, and we're probably now, planting the seed for the next collapse, or the next recession at least. And hopefully we'll all have learned from this process how to do it, how to cover it in advance in a smarter way, and maybe the next one won't be quite as bad.
I wanted to open the floor for questions. Does anyone want to ask anything, or go ahead. If there's a mic back there, or if you want to just yell loud enough, we can hear you.
The point you're making here about how this story is about, right? And you talk about jobs and homes and lives. Maribel, you're talking about very similar things and some of the solutions you put together. Your job is to cover this story from a national perspective. Your job is to connect the dots on a local level. And so I'm curious to know, 2009 happened, and now 2010 is practically here, and there are all sorts of new storytelling devices that we're hearing about at this conference and that all of us are experimenting with and well aware of. If this happened in 2010, how might you apply new technologies to tell the story more precisely and more personally and just better overall than we were capable of just last year?
Well, I think we would probably look at any and all technologies, which has sort of been our way of thinking anyway. But I think what is different now, and what this whole experience taught us, is we're a lot better equipped now and a lot better connected to our readers, to our audience, than ever before, so that the improvements in our coverage, I think, stem from the fact that we understand them better than we ever have. We're listening to them better than we ever have, because we're so much more willing to go where they are. And I think that, for us, has been the big difference.
Yeah, I think for this might apply more to us than it should, embarrassingly. But I think one thing we'll do better next time is in visualization and charting. I think we're going to get better at that. I know we've already gotten a little better at that. It's forced us to. But, I think it's worth remembering that for all of the great new tools we have for reporting, it's still reporting. It's still about, listening to, finding the right people and having the right conversations and the right interviews and listening to people. And, there's no substitute for the kind of Socratic thing that goes on between a source and a reporter. You don't get that from the new technologies.
Ellen, did you want to add anything to that, or?
No, I mean, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, one of the things that I actually really appreciate about the Planet Money guys is the skepticism that they actually bring to every interview that they do, which I think is really important, because for a long time people were looking for the bad guys, who's to blame. And this is a crisis where there is no one bad person. There's a lot of blame to share. And I think it is by not settling with the first answer, but by asking question after question after question after question. Because there's a lot of obfuscation and a lot of sort of superficial, simple things that people grab onto, and I think that's been one of the problems. I actually think that's one of the problems in terms of how politicians have responded to the crisis, that they haven't fully understood and fully dug down to the kind of the essence of what has happened.
One thing I would kind of add from my own personal experience, and I think it touches on what Rich said about just it's reporting, but also what Ellen said about blogs, is that true confession, I was telling the panelists before, I actually spent most of '07 and half of '08 doing research for hedge funds, because I was at Business Week for a while, then went into hedge funds, and then came back out into journalism again. And the arc of improvement of financial coverage between '07, when this really started, and to date, and just the level of sophistication was really remarkable. When this was starting to happen, you really didn't learn that much about the intricacies, or they weren't being explained that well, at least on a sort of a wholesale level. And I attribute a lot of the change to the openness, which is, I think, something that journalism has learned to be, a little more humble and a little more willing to read a blog, to listen to an email that's come in, or just to sort of put your finger out in the wind and see what the community is saying, because I think that that's often, incredibly informative and helps tell the story. But any other questions or anything else stand up, please.
Hi, is this on? Oh, okay. Katie Kemple with economystory.org, and I have a question for Maribel. Actually, I think it's really interesting that as a result of your reporting, the paper ended up raising money for a cause. And it just seems like an interesting model to me, and I'm wondering if internally there was a question whether that was appropriate or not.
I think for us, and this was an across the building effort, but at some point, and of course you have to be careful from an ethical standpoint and such, the things that you would get involved in. But feeding hungry children felt like pretty safe ground to us. Yeah. And at the end of the day, we do have the bully pulpit. We can harness the power of our communication and get the word out to folks in our community about an incredible need, and then to see the incredible rally as a result of that. Was something that was really special, and I think offered a lot of hope to folks in the community, and really captured our role to a certain degree in the community, because at the end of the day we all live there and we have children in those schools and we're a part of the community, and I don't think it's something that we can just turn off.
We don't, as a sort of national, whatever that means, website with a diffuse audience, we don't have the same kind of community to cover, but we have the same bully pulpit. It's a good phrase. The one thing we've found in the last 6 months especially is every time we do a story about mortgages or the Obama plan, and we interview, we solicit personal stories from readers and viewers, and we report their stories out, and we call their bank to confirm the story they're telling us, they invariably get a call from the bank that they hadn't been getting before. And I sort of joke that if we could call, 4 million homeowners, we could solve the housing crisis. But it's really cool. I mean, we didn't say, let's help people get mortgage workouts. We said, let's report the story of how the Obama plan's doing and talk to real people and solicit their experiences. And then in the course of doing, normal diligent reporting and checking all the facts, it happens all the time that the banks respond as soon as they get a call from one of our reporters.
It's kind of amazing what scrutiny does, huh?
Right.
Please, questions.
Mike Resnick from Minnesota Public Radio. I think that I agree about the great reporting and financial literacy and all of that. But what is it that we need to do as a news organization so that we're not simply reporting that the collapse happened and all of these people are unemployed, but we're getting ahead of the story saying, this is what you need to be looking at now and next. So we're not simply reacting to the news, but we're helping people be more proactive in planning and thinking about the next steps for them.
Yeah. We need to, a newsroom like mine needs to not lose interest, for instance, in covering the crazy stuff that goes on at Wall Street just because it's not, top of mind every day. And we need to, we're talking a lot about how to plan how to cover the next phase of this, right? I mean, it's about, it's not going to be about a straight line recovery. It's going to be a long, probably at least year-long commitment. Even the administration's optimistic forecasts have the employment situation not getting better until a year from now. So I think some of it is about sticking in it and not moving on to the next story, which, which even for a website like a newsroom like mine, where we're focused all about money, it's easy to do. You can sort of move on to something else that, because we do need to get readers and viewers. We do need to touch on topics that people want to read about. And sometimes, things like financial literacy is not something people want to read about.
Yeah, I think, this is a question for a million issues, and I think in this case, you have to commit to reporters who are dedicated to this, and you have to listen to them. A lot of reporters at NPR, or a lot of people at NPR, were just as confused and scared about the economy. It was like, let the math guys answer the question. We don't do economy, or I don't understand the economy, and so part of it was economic literacy internally as well. But I think if you don't have a robust economics team that you are committed to for the long haul, you're going to have trouble staying ahead of it. That's really, so if this is the issue that you think is really important, then commit the resources to it and listen to them.
I would add to that, Rich and I were talking just before this about how pretty much today every story is an economy story. You'd be covering any beat, and somehow or other there's some economic implications to that beat. And so to piggyback a little bit, it really goes down to really good beat reporting. And like with anything, the better you are at it and the more sophisticated your level of coverage, the better understanding you have of what's really going on a particular issue or in your community, the better able you're going to be to get ahead of the story. I know we're paying attention to metrics within our community a lot more so than we were, and have better sourcing than we ever did. And I think those are some of the lessons learned.
A couple of questions still. Go ahead, please.
I'm Jim Randall at the Voice of America. I do economic stories. I do them for television, I do them for radio, we do them for the web.
Could you hold the mic up a little? Yeah,
Sure.
there you go.
I do radio. I should know how to do that. Anyway, like you, I wrestled with trying to make these things visual. So there were two things I really wrestled with. One, how do you take a picture of an idea? Two, how do you find normal, ordinary people? I mean, of course, we find some, but how do you find the Smiths, the Joneses, the Joe Lunchbuckets? What's an effective and efficient way to do that? I mean, we find some, but we spend an awful lot of time doing that, and sometimes we don't end up with compelling, interesting people, or as much as we would like.
Well, the finding people is a lot easier. I mean, that's one, despite the fact that, I mean, we can use the social networks, you can use Facebook, and even just, we put solicitations in the bottoms of stories looking for, soliciting emails from readers and viewers on a particular topic, and if we touch the right nerve, we get inundated with stuff. So you then have to report it out, obviously, but the social networks are a great way to find people. Facebook is a great way to find people. It's hard. I can't take any credit for it, but CNN obviously has a pretty good reputation, or bad, depending on how they use it, for visualizing things on the magic wall. And it's easy to make fun of, and we should be made fun of for some of what we do. But it's really cool. I mean, they are committed. My TV side colleagues are really good at taking data and presenting it in video form in a way that people can consume. And I think it was a big commitment. I think we spent a lot of money.
Go ahead. Yes,
I'm MJ Barham with MSN Global. Shout out to Ellen. I have a question for you. So you have these great stories where you engage your audience, and I want to know what conversations you have in your organizations that go beyond the news coverage of the topic. So if you've hit on something that really touches a nerve, do you say, how can we keep this audience engaged on this topic, or with tools or something on the particular topic that may be beyond the traditional news coverage, because you have engaged them in a certain way in a different medium? So are those conversations going on in the organizations now?
Well, I mean, that is exactly what Planet Money turned out to be, because it was completely an experiment. I mean, it was not something that we planned. We have business coverage. We do it every day. And once we realized the audience interest, frankly, it was, how do we keep this going? And I have to say, literally, it was month to month, because NPR was having its own economic crisis. It was month to month until, around March, when I think I was able to sort of scramble enough money to get us through the rest of the fiscal year. And then, frankly, when it came to budgeting for next year, said, look, this is working. We can't stop this. And actually, at a time when, budgets are getting cut and resources are tight, there was actually an investment in Planet Money. So for me, I think the process worked, in an ideal kind of way, because Planet Money also ended up generating revenue for us, which again was sort of phenomenal. In a very short amount of time, it developed its own brand, it developed a revenue stream, and it did that, all because it was serving the audience. So that's the best example I have of how the conversation continued.
I think it's pretty clear that most people would say the economics reporting has improved, maybe perhaps led by NPR and others. However, the impression, I think, is still out there that the press blew it. The economic press in particular blew it on not doing the kind of reporting before the collapse that might have either prepared the people for what was to come, or in fact had some influence in stopping it from happening. And I'm curious, Ellen and others, if you think that rap is fair.
Oh, we were waiting for that question.
I do think it's a fair criticism. On the other hand, on the other hand, there was coverage of what was going on going back to the mid 2000s. It didn't stop Wall Street from doing what it was doing. I think we learn from it and do it better next time, and hopefully also the government does a better job of regulating. Yeah.
I mean, I agree. I think if you go back and look, there were, The Economist. There were some publications that were doing really, really good job. I mean, part of it is it doesn't sink in until a large number of people are affected, and that's a phenomenon whether you're talking about tsunamis in Indonesia or or an economic crisis, and I think we are smarter for it. I think certainly we recognize that we need to pay more attention to people who are experts, who are watching these things and calling things out. And I think the audience is a different audience now too. I think that they're more interested in economic news now. I think, again, you had a group of people who would read the business pages every day, who would get it, who would be deeply interested, but I don't think most of the general public was following this, even if it was on the front page necessarily. I think it really took, unfortunately, a large impact, and that's for the press as well.
And from first-hand experience too, because I was literally in the room with some of the guys that were involved in this. A lot of them didn't see it coming either, and they were making 7, 8 figures, and investing billions of dollars in this. So I think not to say that the media shouldn't be expected, but the stock market's a pretty smart animal, and it didn't see it coming. So it might not be good to beat ourselves up so much over this stuff.
Right.
Go ahead. Sorry. Go ahead, sir. Okay.
Since news organizations are using social networks to get sources on these stories and as early warning systems to find out about trends, I'm wondering if part of the problem is that people who, were having their homes foreclosed or being laid off are using those tools. I mean, maybe that's a wrong assumption, but do you find that the people that are on Twitter and Facebook and some of these other networks experience some of these things?
Oh yeah, big time, definitely. I mean, but it's a fair question because it's always going to be a self-select group of people who decide to participate, and you have to be mindful of that. You have to be mindful that they may or may not be representative of a broad swath of people. You don't want to generalize on based on their experience, but I mean I can't speak for these guys except by their response. But they are in that group of people who have been foreclosed on, people who have lost their jobs. They are interacting with us.
They're us. I mean, this economy has kicked people at all levels, and I know we found in the case of our hunger reporting that the face of the new hungry, it's people like us in this room who never anticipated being in that situation, who are at an even greater disadvantage because they didn't even know how to get connected to resources because they've never needed them in the past and such. And sure, they're on social networks, they're online, they're connected. And so for us, at least, that's what we found.
Hi, Bruce Kuhn with KQED. Question, you mentioned about the internal education of your reporters and the other journalists. Can you talk a little bit about training programs or how you're working for that? I know Ellen, NPR is doing some stuff with local stations on an economic literacy project. So how are we getting our reporters in our newsroom more literate in order to cover this topic?
What we did was a couple things. I mean, like when you start reporting any new story, what do? You read a lot, you look back to antecedents and to history. I mean, I read books about the history of banking crises. And it's sort of interesting. I never thought I would be studying that kind of stuff. But also, like any newsroom, whether it has 15 people or 1,500 people or 3 people, there's the person who develops the expertise that you need, and keeps it all inside him or her because they cover a beat and they do their job. What you can do is you can really tap that and make them share it. The fact is, except for the most sort of hidebound old school journalists, most reporters like to show off even to colleagues who they sometimes poke elbows with. And you can kind of designate people to write best practices notes about how to cover the Federal Reserve if that's what you're worried about not doing well enough, or how to cover stock investing, and have them share it and with other people in the room. And if you have to get outside your newsroom to get the expertise, you can send them to, if you can afford it, send them to schools, send them to seminars. Places like Knight have great programs in specialized reporting where you can sort of cobble together the money to send one person and then have them come back and evangelize and teach everyone else what they learned.
Yeah, I mean, Bruce, you were referring to, in the public radio system, we have the international, national, and local, and for the person who's listening or consuming, it's all one thing. And because this was such a local story, such a national story, such an international story, we were lucky that the CPB was also interested in kind of raising the economic literacy or doing something across public media to help all of us tell the story. What we did at NPR was create a training program for station journalists because we wanted better coverage. We wanted them to tell the local story in a way that was better, realizing what an important story this was, realizing how local it was, and realizing that if, for us, public radio is in every local community, and we have sort of a unique responsibility to report what's going on there. So we've actually created a training program that's focused both on kind of economics, but also, again, what we learned, which is on storytelling. These are really hard stories to tell. They're really hard to tell in an interesting way. So we bring people in for sort of a week-long seminar with lots of guests, but then we stay with them for the next 3 to 4 months and continue to be their editors on their stories to help make sure that they're getting the support that they need, and their newsrooms are committed to this kind of editorial collaboration. So it's not stories that they're necessarily reporting for NPR, it's really what they're doing on their local air.
Hi, David Miller from SF Gate. My question's about international coverage, specifically in the developing world, and how you're handling that. I think I read yesterday or the day before that China's economy is about to surpass Japan as the second largest in the world, and probably within 10 years it may surpass the United States. So that's a huge story going on, and I'm just wondering how you're handling that story, and if the technology that we're kind of focused on here, digital technology, is any help in that regard?
Yeah, I mean that's I would say that for Planet Money for the next year looking forward, they as a team will probably be on the road a lot more than they got on the road this year. We've also, I think that we're collaborating much better with our international staff. I think they've gotten the message that the economy, the global economy, is their story, and it's something that they have to own as well. And so, whether it's our Shanghai reporter or Berlin or Africa, I think all of them have probably done more economics coverage this year than ever before. And again, the truth is that my dream for Planet Money was actually that it wasn't just a unit that produced stories, but it became a resource that informed all of our reporting. whether it was our global health reporting or our political reporting, because I do think that one of the things that we haven't really done a good job talking about is the economic underpinnings of famine, of epidemics, and that's ultimately that's actually where I want to go. I want Planet Money to be a kind of almost a reference unit as well as a reporting unit where all of NPR can have their expertise inform the reporting, because I think that's the way to tell the global story.
We get to we're fortunate enough to work closely with CNN colleagues around the world who are great correspondents and producers, and we sort of can use that news gathering. But we also we think at least, or we try to explain the global economy from our perch in Manhattan. I mean, it can be, we obviously can't report it on the ground, but there are a lot of smart people who understand the sort of interactions between the Chinese economy and our economy, and what the Chinese purchases of our government debt mean to our lives, and the well-being of the U.S. economy. And we have a couple of smart people, one writer in particular who really understands it, who knows how to interview the right people, and he can write smart explanatory pieces about that kind of make the connections between different economies. It can be done without boots on the ground, too.
Yeah.
One last chance for any questions. It's just about 5, so we probably want to wrap it up. If not, then thank you very much. This has been, we have one? Yeah, no? Okay. Thank you very much. This has been a really good panel. And if anybody wants to come up and talk to the panelists, they'll be here for a couple minutes.